Hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy. This is the show where we work with the AWS community. We talk about FinOps, about AI. We try to have guests from AWS. And today we're lucky enough to have one. My name's Stephen Barr.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rahul Subramaniam, and welcome to the show. Today, we're going to be talking about a whole lot of stuff that we haven't really touched in the past. We haven't touched anything about our environmental footprint, the carbon footprint, all of that stuff. So, we're going to be talking to Matt from AWS, who's going to enlighten us a little bit more on that.
This is
Matt, welcome
Matt
to the
Berk.
show.
Yeah, thank you for
Yeah,
being here, Matt.
thank you so much for having me. So, hi everyone. I'm Matt Berk. I'm a principal technical account manager. Been with Amazon for a little over 6 years now, based in New York. And in my spare time, I'm the community lead for FinOps within our technical field community. So, this is a topic near and dear to my heart, as well as I've been helping a lot of FinOps teams navigate sustainability. So, when I got asked, well, what would you like to talk about on the show? This is one of the topics that came up. So, I'm excited to be here.
Well, yeah, we're so excited to have you. Like Raul said, this has been an undercovered topic of ours. So really excited to rectify that and understand all of the details that go into these calculations. It's obviously just in the prep that we've done, it's a lot further ahead than I thought it was, and I'm looking forward to kind of diving into the details.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, oh,
Yeah,
go
but
ahead.
before we do that, actually, Matt, we'd love to know your history at AWS and what you did before then. How did you come to be at AWS, and you know, how to this position?
Sure. So I my journey started. I was in IT consulting for almost 10 years before I joined Amazon, doing various things from help desk to eventually a lot more like on premises networking and collaboration. So like phones and contact centers and basically all of the Cisco kind of engineer of the trade. And then I started looking at our cloud consulting and started to understand the power of AWS and got reached out to by the recruiter, and I came here. And I've been a TAM my whole time at Amazon. So what that means is I'm part of the support organization. I help some of our largest customers navigate their operations on the cloud. And oftentimes TAMs are tasked with these cost optimization efforts. And as
Hmm.
FinOps has been evolving over the years, they're more and more a part of or embedded in the FinOps teams. And so part of why I've been drawn to this is I had some large customers work with me to try to understand how to build a FinOps practice before we called it a FinOps practice.
Right.
And now I've been helping customers and helping the community grow through training, through learning paths, and then sometimes through events. So I met with Steven at FinOpsX, and we're currently programming our track for reInvent right now.
Oh, that's pretty awesome. So, just a recap for those audience who don't know what the TAM role is and their place. Uh, Correct me if I'm wrong. It's been a while since I looked at the specific things, but if any customer is on enterprise support, they typically get allocated a TAM that you can use or you can leverage to basically solve some of the hardest problems that you have with everything from migrating to the cloud to being efficient in operating in the cloud to then figuring out how to solve your next big problem. And that team is there to help you be successful in AWS. Did I get any of that wrong? And are there
No,
other mechanisms by
that's
which
correct. Yeah,
are there any other
we're
mechanisms
your.
yeah, that they can
Oh,
engage
go
with
ahead.
TAM?
Yeah, I mean, as we get onboarded to account, typically we'll have what we call an enterprise. Like you'll subscribe to enterprise support. We'll own something called the enterprise onboarding. We'll talk you through all those features that you get of enterprise support. One of them being access to a TAM. Another one being you get that 15-minute response time to
Right.
a business critical case that you open up. And so we're really here to anything that you have on AWS to help you with that, whether it's again resiliency, operational excellence, cost optimization. It really runs the gamut.
Yeah. I would also add, and this is from my experience working with TAMs over the last almost 17 years. TAMs are also amazing when you can just have a conversation with them and tell them, here's my biggest problem. What do you recommend? And TAMs are amazing at trying to find the right match of AWS services to what you're doing, running POCs, and trying to figure out whether there is a good solution that can be applied even to problems that are outside of AWS but can potentially be solved by AWS. So if you haven't done that already, if you haven't reached out to your TAM or you don't know who your TAM is, I'd recommend reaching out right away. They are an incredible resource helping you be more successful with your AWS adventures.
Thanks so much for the endorsement of my team.
No, we've had an amazing experience with TAMs over the last 17 odd years that we've been with AWS. I think the concept of TAMs didn't really exist in the early days. It started as a role much later, but there were folks within the product teams that you could literally pick up the phone and call and have conversations about what's going on in the early days. And that used to be amazing, and it just evolved with scale to becoming this dedicated org. So thanks to all of you. I think a lot of folks are incredibly successful on AWS for that reason. I don't think it would have been possible without the TAM and all the stuff that you guys do.
That's great to hear. Yeah, some of our original TAMs are now like the senior directors and leadership of the support org. And it's grown a lot over the years. Like we've been slowly rolling out like new support offerings, things like incident detection and response. So that allows we had customers asking like, hey, you know about our resources, or we have these deep conversations with you. Why can't you just open up a case on our behalf if something goes down? So that's something that we've released in the past couple of years is you can set what alarms that you want to trigger a proactive case, and then we'll have an incident management engineer get to you within 5 minutes. So there's been a lot of cool evolution of support as the TAM role has been shifting from this very like can be tactical because we're trying to manage your support cases to a more strategic partnership.
No, that's
we do need to cover the incident response. I think that's a different show. I really want to dive into the carbon footprint part, but that is pretty cool.
Yeah,
do that. Okay, it's carbon footprint. So my understanding, initially, when you look at variation in EC2 instance pricing, right, you can see that's all variable cost, and you think a big chunk of that, the hardware cost is obviously amortized pretty quickly, so a big chunk of that's energy cost, but then. So you think, the more efficient sources of energy would hopefully be cheaper, but then clearly all of these regions exist within countries that have maybe different incentives, different power. So then, how do we look at it from a carbon lens, and what's the carbon footprint tool? How are we thinking about it?
Yeah, so I would say part of this kind of push is that we've completely redone the carbon footprint tool. So folks have experience of what it was in the past. It's very different now. It used to be under like the cost and usage report like page, and it used to be very I would say high level, and that tool was basically saying here's what our estimate of your footprint is based on your overall AWS organization. It gave you a basis in here's what your breakdown is for EC2, S3, and then everything else. And then it gave you just 3 regions. It gave you Americas, APAC, and EMEA. And like that. What do I do with that? And then the worst part was that you see on my screen here, this is the download CSV. So all you could do is download a CSV file of that, which then you would have to create some sort of automation on your end or ingestion process on your end to do anything with it. So we've completely reimagined both how the tool looks, how it operates, what our methodology is for tracking carbon, and then that's unlocked a couple of really cool use cases for using this data.
So before we dive into the tool, can you just tell us a little bit about why the need for this tool came about? Like, what is the request from customers that's really driving this tool? How are they using it? What are the use cases that they defined for knowing all of this information?
I think a lot of companies, especially public companies, are tracking sustainability goals. They're talking about their sustainability practices to the street. And one of the bigger wins is moving to the cloud and reducing their overall carbon footprint by the economies of scale of moving into AWS. But then it's the question of how do you report on that? What was your emissions, let's say, on premises versus what are your emissions in the cloud? What does that savings look like? And then even further than that, it's, well, where are we having the highest impact? Because there's this newer pillar. I don't. It's not even that new anymore for under well architected, which is just sustainability, right? So if you're trying to look at, are my applications well architected from a sustainability standpoint, one of those things is, what regions am I going to be operating out of? What are the cleanest regions? And so getting some of that reporting is really helpful to create that feedback mechanism of, okay, maybe if we don't need to be in X region, we can do our DR in a different run because this one is more emission friendly, let's say. So that's another way of looking at these decisions beyond just cost or beyond, let's say, data residency requirements.
Got it. And sustainability has now become an important pillar in FinOps as well, because it ties to a lot of the way you report on, your financials. How you really need to think about it as a team, pretty much like everything else in FinOps. So why don't we dive right in? Let's look at what the tool does, and then we might have other tracks that we go on to from the questions that arise from there.
Yeah, so you can get to this tool from the Billing and Cost Management console. It's got its own selection now, Customer Carbon Footprint tool. And what you'll see here is that we can filter based on the last up to 38 months. So if you've got an account that's been here for a while, you can go all the way back. And it'll do a breakdown of your emission summary. So it'll do an estimated emissions, and the estimated savings that you're getting through AWS, through our purchase of renewable energy. And you'll get to the charts that you really want to see, which is, what are your carbon emissions over time, broken up by the regions that you're operating in. So you can see we have data going back to 2022 in this account.
Right.
And the emissions are pretty small because this is a demo account. But you can see the impact of real resources being run, let's say US West, versus resources that we're in Cape Town, for example. And then we can break that down. Oh, go ahead.
And here the emissions are actually measured in metric ton CO2 emitted?
Yes. Yeah. Metric tons of CO2 emissions. Yes.
Got it. Great. So this is actually pretty granular.
Yes. Yeah. So we can go pretty far back. The one thing that customers do ask for is it takes about 3 months for us to get you that data. So right now we're up to March. And the reason for that is we're actually waiting for our utility bills to come in for all the data centers, for us to run the calculations on our end to understand what was the spread. Because certain things can affect the overall carbon footprint of our regions. Like we kind of think of the cloud as like, kind of ephemeral, but like real generators get kicked on at certain times when things occur on the grid, and that and we have to account for the emissions from those generators. So it does take 3 months for us to start to report. So there's a bit of a lag, but you have this data now going back 38 months.
So I guess that was my question: is it actually is variable month to month? So, for example, I know the Prime Minister of Australia was just here talking about a big investment in solar-powered Australian AWS regions, and so if Australia, I guess, had a very cloudy month or two, or I don't know, a volcano erupted there, and the solar went down, so that would be reflected in the emissions and in the prices. Like you'd say, okay, normally this is solar, but it was really cloudy, so they had to turn on the generator, and that would all get reflected in there.
Yeah, and that's also where we have this new calculation method that you can choose between, where there's both the location-based method and the market-based method. And you can click the info. There's all the content here. And I think unless you're a sustainability expert, your eyes might start to glaze over. But what it essentially means is we can choose to just look at the location-based methodology, which is what is the emissions within the grid at that time in those regions, which is where you'll see like actually the number goes up here. And you can see a bit more impact, let's say, across these different regions, where if I switch over to the market-based method, this drops a bit. And the reason for that is because, historically over time, Amazon has been putting money and putting credits towards renewable energy projects that then feed renewable energy into the grids to offset the carbon footprint of any dirty emissions that we have. And so this market-based methodology then shows that delta. And then what it allows you to do is say, okay, here's the estimated location-based emissions. Let's say you were just running the same amount of compute on your own versus the savings that you have as Amazon, so in AWS, and so you get that output here. So this is kind of if you wanted to just know, hey, what am I saving based on Amazon's commitment to renewable energy? You kind of have that here over the month-to-month savings.
Got it. So if I had a server running in AWS, I think it would be relatively easy to compute the carbon emissions. But a lot of our services that we run are either shared services or shared infrastructure and shared everything, basically, including VPCs and the networks and the EBS volumes and the likes of everything else there. S3 is another perfect example. So can we dive a little bit deeper into how this is computed? What's the basis for deciding how much carbon emission there really is?
Yeah. So we have this breakdown by service. You notice there's not much granularity here, and that's because we can attribute things like EC2, S3, and even now CloudFront, which is running at edge locations, to an actual physical server in a rack. But it gets more complicated when we talk about managed services that are built on top of EC2 and EBS. So we have this whole methodology of how we're both thinking about the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, how we're reporting that. And if we look at, for example, how we're calculating for each individual service, what we're doing is thinking about this from a cluster standpoint of let's say, a particular data center or collection of data centers connected to the same grid within a region, then the server racks underneath that, then how much of that is allocated to specific foundational services versus non-foundational services being like a managed service or something that's running on top of EC2, and then doing a kind of economic allocation of the usage of those particular non-foundational services. It even gets down to the level of like, if a service is using bare metal, then we can just allocate the entire carbon footprint of that particular server to that service. But if it's running, let's say, on top of a bunch of EC2 on top of the host itself, then we're doing an additional allocation.
And then if you're using, so there's fundamentally a different way you look at, for example, if there's spot instances, I know pricing can be very different, but carbon emissions are not directly proportional to that, right? The carbon emissions are going to be whatever compute you use.
Yeah, exactly. It's still going to be tied to the server itself versus like you're getting that at a great discount, but not necessarily from a carbon standpoint.
So I'm thinking about something like D-SQL, where obviously there's going to be a big component of that, which is in a rack, but then you have it in multiple availability zones. And also you've got a big dependency on the time service, which I guess would fall into the non-foundational. And so it's actually kind of interesting information you get from this, is like the breakdown of how these higher level services are built.
Yeah, and even to the point of like how we're allocating stuff within a specific rack, like we will get down to the level here of like we're giving a certain example of like, let's say a cluster has 500 metric tons of carbon CO2 emissions, but then we're talking about the individual power draw within that cluster and allocating it accordingly.
Got it. Yeah, so if you have one part of the rack actually running at 100% CPU versus another one that's running at a fraction of that, you are basically going to allocate different amounts to those, correct?
Yep, exactly. And then you can even see here, like, for example, the way that we're allocating this between foundational and non-foundational services. So we have all these formulas and charts. I won't say that I understand 100% of it, but I know enough to talk through how we're distributing it out.
As I see all of this, I can't wrap my head around the sheer volume of data that's probably being collected.
Well, that's why it takes 3 months.
Yes, exactly.
From every little, piece of server equipment that's running in the data center, collecting all of that and then rolling it up across every service, every user, every just detail of granularity. That's pretty impressive. That itself, I mean, it should probably be a case study in how AWS scales, or how
Yeah.
AWS is using its own services to kind of solve these insanely computationally intensive calculations.
Well, here's a question for you: what surprises have you found? Like, what servers have you thought, wow, that's really efficient, or a region that's really either clean or dirty? Like, what are the surprises in this data that you found digging into it?
So I think what's helpful now is we can do this breakdown by region, and before it was just by geo. And so the question I often got from customers was, hey, most of our stuff is in, US East 1, US West 2, a bit in EU West 1 or 2, and we have a very small footprint in APAC. But
Mhm.
APAC is by far the place where we have the most emissions. It doesn't really make sense when we're lining it up from a cost standpoint and a usage standpoint to emissions. And the reason for that was that it was harder for us to offset um, renewable energy in those regions, and so they were seeing this outsized impact. And that's where, like, if you look at things like our climate pledge or our sustainability like annual report, we'll talk about which ones are the regions that we got to 100% renewable, and then which ones aren't. And you would notice that like certain ones like Singapore were not on that list at the time. And so customers were seeing that and going, "Whoa, that's so weird. We don't run that much there."
So is the regional? So I guess you have to compensate for the emissions locally. Then you can't say, okay, well, I've done this in APAC, but I've got this great thing over in, I don't know, California, and therefore it balances out. It actually is region specific.
Yes, because we're tracking how the renewable projects are going to feed the energy into that grid that we're pulling it out of.
That's really neat. Okay, so you can't just kind of abstract the problem to somewhere halfway around the world and say, oh yeah, somewhere 8,000 miles away, there's a tree, right? That doesn't work. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, local in region.
That's great.
Yeah, that's
So yeah,
pretty
and you
impressive.
can see it here in like the way that we talk about this, where we're saying we're considering contractual instruments such as energy attribute certificates, power purchase agreements, and all of the renewable energy projects that we have worldwide.
Curious question. When you have a lot of spare capacity within the data centers, does that all get, do all the carbon emissions on that get allocated to AWS themselves?
That I don't know.
Because,
I assume so, but we're talking specifically customer carbon. But yeah, when we probably report out that I could assume that, but I don't know the true answer.
that would be interesting to understand as well. But this is so impressive. I mean, I just find the granularity of the data absolutely mind-boggling. And when I think about it as a computer science problem of how you would go about solving this and actually reporting all of this, I mean, this needs to be its own case study, I think, in
Yeah.
in the scale and complexity of the operation.
So I would say if folks are super interested to dive into the weeds, that our white paper on the methodology is really detailed and kind of gets into the exact formulas that we're using. For folks that just kind of want to report, I can talk a bit about like what customers then like do with this data, because it's nice
Yeah,
to
that'd be
see
great.
what the emissions are, but and it's like, okay, what do I do with all this information?
Yeah, let's dive
So
right into it.
yeah, so we have this legacy version of you can just download a CSV. That's I think for most FinOps folks, not what they would like to do. They would like to get it into some sort of pipeline and build some sort of dashboarding around it. So what we've actually done is created a new custom data export specifically for carbon. And what
Mhm.
is cool about this, and you can see in my console, it's giving me all um, the pop-ups to advertise this, but it's the first time that we've used this platform, our new data exports platform. It's typically associated with FinOps. It's the
Mhm.
Kerr 2.0, it's legacy Kerr, it's Focus 1.0, and cost optimization recommendations. And now we're adding carbon emissions to that as just one other data source that you can select, and you get all of the features of data exports, which means that your columns are going to be exactly as is. We're not going to make any changes to the data file or the schema, and then you can actually pick what columns are coming in and out of your file the same way you would do it in Kerr or do it with your cost op recommendations. So it's the same pipeline setup, and you can just
Got it.
send this to an S3 bucket, and it behaves essentially the same way as
Just
you would
like
set up
any data
a Cur
export.
file.
Got it. And then how
And
are people typically applying this in their day-to-day operations? Like, do you have any case studies or any scenarios where customers are actually paying attention to this and saying, not just reporting in their annual reports, but what kind of real-world action are they actually taking on this?
yeah, so I would say that like when you surface this sustainability impact or the carbon impact to teams, then I think that brings, it's the same way like when you're creating cost transparency. Like a lot of times the struggle is, I don't see my overall costs, so I don't do anything about it. I get all these recommendations from the central team, and then it's like, whatever, I don't care. And then once you create that transparency, they start to think about it and take those actions. And I think it's the same for sustainability. So what we can do now with this data export is, this is simple in Athena, but you can run queries against the specific accounts that are like, what's my footprint by account and by region, which is a bit more granular than, let's say, even what's in the console itself. And you can get the breakdown of, per month, per account, what your CO2 emissions are per service, which is just EC2, S3, Cloudflare, and other. And then you can share that out with folks. So what we've built as part of what's the sustainability dashboard that we've had already, is a carbon emissions tab. And now you can share this out by account ID, what their total emissions are, and that can drive sustainability decisions. And really, when I say sustainability decisions, I'm really just talking about using the sustainability pillar well architected to then inform decisions that you're making. We can talk a little bit about what that means in a sec.
Can we take a 2-minute break and then we come back? We can jump right back into that.
Yeah.
At once, but hold on 1 second. I need to introduce you guys to the official AWS Made Easy mascot.
Wow!
My God.
This is a 3/4 Saint Bernard, quarter poodle. She's a very, 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 very big 8-year-old puppy who's going to be, very big 8-week-old puppy.
8-week-old, yeah.
Yeah, that will be joining us. I'm going to put her down, and she's going to. This is her first of many AWS Made Easy recordings. So Nutmeg is our new show mascot. That way I can write off her food bill.
Right. And you want to write off the vaccinations too. That's the worst when you get the new puppy.
Let's jump right back into it. So how are customers using this data? It's on one hand, it's like a really good, it's nice to know, but then what do you actually do with it?
Yeah, so I think, I'll break it into 2 steps, which is like how customers are then sharing this with their teams, or how we are giving them the option to do it, and then what customers action they can take. So we have this dashboard as part of the Cloud Intelligence dashboards. If you're in the FinOps space, you probably heard of the Cloud Intelligence dashboards tons of times. And so this is under our sustainability proxy metrics. So the original dashboard, before we updated it, it just has proxies for your usage. So to understand where your usage is, and creating some proxy metrics in terms of understanding like how that would map to sustainability goals. But now that we have a data export from carbon emissions, we actually can break that down so that you're seeing your total over your account IDs per region. So some of the same stuff that you're getting out of the console experience, but now you can scope that down to only the carbon emissions that matter for your business units, for your particular accounts, and for your regions. So we can again map the emissions to product codes, what's overall taking that share of between those 3 things. And so then you have this nice set of data that you can then share out, and you'll have that through the data export, because that cross-account view, again, is only going to be available in your payer account. Most folks don't have access to that. So this then democratizes the access to this carbon data. So this is part one, is understanding what's my overall impact. And then part two becomes, okay, how can I reduce this number? What can I do to bring this down?
So is the end goal of this, people are going to be doing load shifting based on their carbon output at a given time? So, for example, similar to compute shifting, right? The Mumbai region has some really great deals on AMD-based compute. But would you want to do, I suppose, carbon-based load shifting as well?
I think it's part of just as you shift left and talk about what your architectural decisions are, where you're going to be, you can now see the impact of what those decisions are today and what your future deployments could look like. So the same way we recommend to look at regions from pricing, you should also be looking at regions from, let's say, a carbon emissions output standpoint and deciding where you can land there. And then if you need to be in a particular region, then the idea would be to talk about what are things that you can do to architect to make it use less power. And so one of the main ways that we've been recommending to customers, because it aligns again with the same goals that a FinOps team has, is, well, you can migrate to Graviton, and Graviton will be a better price performance, but also lower energy usage. And that journey will allow you to reduce, at least on the EC2 side, you'll see the measurable savings month over month as you migrate things over that can migrate over.
Yeah. So Graviton seems like a really good example. So this is something we keep wearing our CloudFix and FinOps hat, and we keep asking this question. What are the other low-hanging fruit? Graviton is one you just talked about being one of the simpler ones. It has a dual advantage of not just reducing your cost, but also being more environmentally sustainable. Are there any others that you would think of as low-hanging fruit?
I would say specifically within Graviton, and so we have this Graviton savings dashboard, and we break this up across EC2, RDS, Elasticache, and OpenSearch. And RDS is a great example of, if you've got Graviton, if you've got databases that are compatible with Graviton, and if you go down here, we talk about what those are. RDS, MySQL, Aurora MySQL, PostgreSQL, RDS, and PostgreSQL Aurora. You can just change your instance type, your DB type, to a Graviton instance with minimal downtime, right? It's basically just a change instance type, and you're now creating savings. Where compared to something like EC2, where you're going to have to change the AMI, you're going to have to do some testing to make sure that the dependencies are compatible with ARM-based processors. It's going to be a little bit more heavy lifting. I've seen a lot of customers, as part of savings pushes and as part of like optimization waves, moving to manage service Graviton, because that's a much easier lift. You don't have to do much testing as long as you're in this compatibility matrix. And then, of course, we can show you with these dashboards both what opportunities there are and then what are the savings associated with those opportunities.
Yeah, I think these ones kind of repeat themselves in what we generally talk about in FinOps, which is these are all completely managed services. Moving to Graviton is literally guaranteed to work with AWS without any downtimes. And if there is an issue, it'll just revert back without causing any issues in your deployment. So this becomes a no-brainer. I don't think there could be anything easier than this to just switch over. Makes complete sense to me.
Yeah, and it's the same for right sizing too. Like if you're reducing your overall footprint, let's say as an application owner, right? Because maybe overall as the company, you're continuing to grow, you're continuing to add new workloads, but as an application owner, how can I reduce the carbon impact of my particular app or workload? Right sizing is one way to do that, or scaling in, scaling out, and those things will apply. The same FinOps principles for cost can apply for sustainability.
So, yeah, I mean, we should probably experiment with some right sizing and look at how that has actually changed some of these reports. That'd be an interesting experiment for us to run, Stephen.
And then,
absolutely.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just thinking about how we, the way you can incorporate this Yeah, it would be really interesting to see the correlations between, you know, all of the compute recommendations. You know, we surface a lot of the compute optimizer recommendations and other cost savings recommendations, and it would be really interesting to see the correlation in the carbon footprint versus cost optimization efforts, because you think that they're, in a sense, since you're paying for energy as a big chunk of your variable cost, that this would essentially be pretty tightly correlated, but not necessarily perfectly correlated, because right, the world is not in perfect alignment on this stuff yet.
One other follow-up question that I had for you, Matt, is have you generally seen that with newer hardware or with newer generation of CPUs and so on a per unit basis, do they end up becoming more efficient in general from a sustainability standpoint? Or because I know that like for some of the newer generation CPUs, particularly on the Intel side or the AMD side, on an average per rack, your consumption might be significantly higher, but the sheer volume of CPU, vCPUs that you add to one of those, just on a per unit basis, becomes so much more economically viable, but also potentially that much more environmentally sustainable. But does that is that something that's common, say, between these kind of racks to Nitro's platform to other stuff? Like, is sustainability part of these? Do you see sustainability playing out with every new generation of hardware that gets launched?
So I can't comment on like the exact like what's a 8th generation instance rack look like from PowerDraw to like
Mhm.
a 7th generation instance rack. But what I will say is that I think it feeds back into the right sizing recommendations, in that typically as you're moving from one generation to another, you're getting better price to performance, and therefore
Correct.
can use different t-shirt size on that instance, and then reduce your overall impact.
Got
And
it.
there's also like the shift in the newer generations where we're not hyper threading on the CPU potentially on some of these,
Got
and
it.
then you're getting much better performance on a single core than you would if it was hyper threaded.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense.
And clearly, your GPU instances are going to blow out your power usage, right? Your P40. Actually, what I would love to know is what are those SAP HANA instances that exist? The ones with
The U
The
types and
X1
the X
32XL.
types, yeah.
yeah, I'd love to know how much those draw. We should launch one for an hour an hour and figure that out. It's an
Yeah, I mean,
expensive
you're
experiment.
thinking about like a terabyte of memory, just the power on that alone. That's
You
interesting.
you
Yeah.
can go up to four TB on some of those instances.
Yeah.
So you can go to 4 terabytes, and the 32XLs have what 128 cores or something like that. So that's a lot. Or 96. I think they have 96 vCPUs
Yeah,
that
so let's
support it.
instantiate one of those and then start a Bitcoin miner.
The last thing
Oh,
that I'll mention here is that as customers are doing FinOps and trying to set goals, we have, and it's probably been mentioned on the show before, but the KPI tracker. And
yeah,
so if you're trying to set something specifically to align with sustainability, we've got a pretty easy template to say like, hey, maybe we want to shift like 20% EC2 graviton or 20% RDS graviton, and use that as a proxy metric or a proxy goal to start to reduce the carbon footprint of an individual workload or account. So I think this is a
got it.
really easy way to kind of try to drive that. Otherwise, like again, it becomes a shift left conversation of like what regions do we want to operate in, and which ones have the most outsized impact on our scoring so far.
Got it. I think with everything like in that we've talked about in FinOps, it's the walk, crawl, run approach. Start with the low hanging fruit and then advance to others as and when the business and economic impact really has value from making the shift. So start small. There are a whole bunch of low hanging fruit that are both from a regular FinOps when we're talking about costs in general. I think those align really well to all the sustainability stuff. So just makes sense to execute on those now and not wait on those later. They're double benefits now. There's even more reason to justify those efficiencies.
Yeah, the only thing will be waiting patiently for the 3 months to see your efforts come in. I already have customers asking for Cost Explorer to update even faster than it already does. So I'm sure people will be tapping their toes to get the latest report.
Yeah, I can imagine that need for real-time data at some point. But it's a good start. I think, like everything in AWS, things keep getting better over the years. It keeps, improving, and you'll see similar, leaps in the capabilities of these dashboards. I mean, just looking at the cloud intelligence dashboard, it's come such a long way in the last 2.5, 3 years. It's been absolutely remarkable what the tool does now.
Yeah, and if you don't have these installed today, part of the templates to deploy the cloud intelligence dashboards, they've been updated to include the new Carbon data export. So you can just literally,
Great.
as you're going through that template, whether it's CloudFormation or Terraform, say, yes, I want the Carbon. We'll do that entire deployment pipeline for you. So we'll bring up the S3 buckets, we'll bring up the glue crawlers, we'll put it in Athena for you, and then you can deploy the dashboard on the back of that.
Perfect. One last question for you, Matt. What's the cost associated with actually getting these reports or getting this data turned on?
So the only cost would be the actual report sitting in the S3 bucket. It's not a very big, it's like megabytes worth of S3 right now for me, depending on the size of your organization, mostly by accounts and regions that you
Got it.
operate in. That'll, bloat the line, not bloat, but like it will expand the line items. But compared to something like Kerr, it's really not going to be that big because we're not breaking this
Got it.
down over too many dimensions. It's really just the account IDs, the regions, the services, the location-based versus the market-based methodologies. That's
Got it.
basically it. Actually, I'll show you what that looks like in. Oh, I already got signed off. In the data export. Is you basically just have all of these columns in here, so it's not too big.
Right.
So, and then cost for QuickSight or for CID is always going to be dependent on, again, the amount of data that you're pushing through and the QuickSight licensing. But if you already have QuickSight enabled, then it's a relatively minor cost. We're talking about hundreds of dollars versus, versus like thousands.
Got it. That's really awesome. Again, thank you so much for coming on the show, Matt. This is very, very enlightening. We've never covered sustainability really on this show. It's not come up as one of the big topics, but I can see the double benefits, the sheer alignment of all the FinOps cost related goals and the sustainability goals seem to go very hand in hand. And now you can justify two reasons to do something more urgently and get more efficient. So it just makes that much more sense. So thank you so much for coming on the show and enlightening us with all of this information.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Like, this is the intersection of these things is super interesting, especially now with the new tool out. So I'd ask your audience, go into the console, kick the tires on this. And then, of course, if you want to dive even deeper, go deploy the dashboard in your environment and check it out.
Yeah, we're going to be advising them to do just that. It'll be in the newsletter. It'll be think about other ways that we can kind of integrate this data to help empower customers. I was reflecting on my first, assembly as a 7-year-old kid, and they said, "All right, we're going to have these blue trash cans in all the classrooms now," and thinking, "Okay, wow." From having no idea what to do, and now we're talking about this very fine grained. How much energy does a compute service use? It's so cool to see the trajectory of sustainability evolve, in a short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to continue to evolve, and we'll get better with the reporting methodologies, and maybe there'll be new power sources.
That'd be cool.
Looking forward to it.
Well, thanks, Matt. We really appreciate it, and we'll thanks audience for joining in. Please let us know if you have any questions, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry, because CloudFix uses AWS recommended savings techniques. It fixes, not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the link to start saving now.